We need to talk about Cole Sprouse. So if you guys have been following along, you know that Cole Sprouse is a famous actor. He is well known for his roles with his brother, Dylan Sprouse, in Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and Sweet Life on Deck on Disney Channel. But recently, he came under fire for an appearance he did on the Call Her Daddy podcast. Which had a lot of people asking questions like, who is Cole Sprouse really? As somebody who's neurodivergent, I found the episode to be fascinating. And in fact, I definitely recommend that after you watch this podcast episode, you go over to that podcast episode and watch it all the way through to see if you agree with my take on this. I'm so excited to discuss whether some of the words that he was saying and even the smoking were because of his personality and his choices or because of something else entirely. So if you are interested, make sure you stay tuned to the end of the podcast because I did a lot of research on this. If you are new to this channel, hi, my name is Gabrielle and welcome to the In My 20s Diaries. This is a podcast on the intersectionality between ADHD, spirituality, and singleness. So if those are your jam, make sure you leave a big fat like and let's get into the video. So if you watched Disney Channel in the same era that I did, you would know that Dylan and Cole Sprouse were huge players at that time. Both Dylan and Cole were part of two major TV shows, but they were also huge in the Danimal sweepstakes.
Strawberry explosion! Now that's a blast of flavor!
You can get the code from specially marked Danimals or go to Danimals.com for free means of entry. With your parents' permission, post your fun Danimals video to be judged by Dylan and Cole. The grand prize is a trip to Hollywood.
To hang with us.
Plus, $10,000.
Nice!
Many will enter, few will win.
Danimals!
Which to this day are a little bit of a conspiracy theory. After their tenure on Disney Channel though, both Dylan and Cole kind of split ways. Dylan went off to the side to work on more independent projects and he took a break from the spotlight, while Cole ended up getting a huge role on Riverdale as Jughead Jones.
I'm weird. I'm a weirdo.
Shortly after the show happened, there was a documentary that came out called Quiet on Set, which talked about some of the many things that went on with childhood actors behind the scenes. Afterwards, Cole went on a bit of a podcast tour, which is when he came into contact with the Call Her Daddy podcast. This podcast is known for its adult content, and so it was very interesting to me that a lot of people were really digging in on him about smoking and some of the things that were talked about on that podcast. After doing some research, I found out that Dylan Sprouse has ADHD. This is something that I found out on his IMDb page. And if you guys know this, if one twin has ADHD, oftentimes there's a big chance that the other twin has ADHD as well. Feeling interested, I decided to do a little Google searching, and I found this Variety article where Cole Sprouse talked about how both he and his brother have ADHD and how that caused them to have a unique schooling experience. You might be wondering, like, why is this even important? A lot of the symptoms of ADHD are actually invisible, but they might be things that make you question somebody's personality. I know for me, when I was in school, people always would get on me because I would use super big words and repeat myself over and over again. These habits that I had were some of the exact same habits that people were getting on Sprouse about in the comments. A lot of these behaviors, I believe, can be contributed to stimming. So STIM stands for a self-stimulatory behavior, and it is any behavior that really helps somebody with ADHD. So I just wanted to pop in and say that people with autism also do STIM, but they STIM for a different reason, which isn't really as pertinent to this video since we're talking about ADHD, and that's why I didn't mention it in this clip. A lot of people with ADHD have a deficiency in a hormone called dopamine. Dopamine is kind of what gives excitement and helps to initiate focus. When stimming, people with ADHD are raising their levels of dopamine so that they'll be able to focus better on the person that is speaking or on the topic at hand. Besides increasing focus, stimming can also help with self-soothing, which is good in like nerve-wracking situations or situations of intense anxiety or emotional excitement. So some common stimming behaviors, I'm gonna grab my notes for this, are tapping of the foot, looking around the room or wandering eyes, repeating the same phrase over and over again. It doesn't have to be like close together. Playing with like clothing, like hair or shirts, or even smoking, which I thought was a very interesting one. So I know you may be thinking like everybody does these, so how could they be stimming? So even though somebody might do these things all the time, and people with ADHD, especially, these behaviors are often and they get very disruptive sometimes. So the two main stems that I'm going to talk about in relationship to Cole Sprouse are the smoking and then the use of grandiose / repetitive phrasing. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is smoking, because this was the number one gripe that I saw that people had with this podcast episode. Personally, I don't like smoking myself, but I do want to say before I get into this that I really respect Sprouse for asking the podcast owner if he could smoke in the studio and then waiting for her answer before he took the cigarettes out. It was very obvious that he respected this lady and he wanted to make sure that she was comfortable in his space and that he was not trying to, like, you know, kick her out or anything like that. And that is not something that he had to do. Now, I do want to address this one thing because I was watching a video, and in the video, the person said that Cole Sprouse never smoked and that, you know, he only was smoking on the podcast episode to look cool. I thought this was hilarious because Cole Sprouse has always smoked. There have already been a lot of studies on nicotine, and from what we know, nicotine does impact the brain and does impact the reward system. Also, every time that Cole would take a puff of the cigarette, it would be when he would answer a question that was nerve-wracking or a little bit more emotionally exciting.
I think he understands that more than anything.
When you say that your parents obviously were on different pages, at what age did you recognize that, and like what were those conversations?
This was one of the longer puffs of his cigarette that Cole Sprouse took throughout the duration of his interview. This happened at around like the 2-minute mark, I think. And it was because the podcaster had asked him about how his mom and dad thought about fame and if they thought about it the same way. And if you guys know and have been following Cole for a while, you know that he went on another big podcast. And during this episode, he talked about how he was exploited as a child through childhood acting. And so this is obviously a very touchy subject for him. And it seemed like this puff of the cigarette, out of all of the other ones in the podcast episode, was one that was releasing a lot of the stress and pain and hurt that he felt from this topic.
And I think it also has contributed to my conflict with this industry as I've grown up. Like the philosophy of continuing within acting has been definitely shaped by how I've watched people torn asunder by it.
I remember when you said earlier, like,
see the camera turn away from Sprouse as he was about to take a puff of his cigarette. But this time and in this scene, he was talking about how everybody on Hollywood tends to have a type of sickness. And he was really going deep on that subject. And it seemed like something he was really passionate about, but also something that was very anxiety provoking. He could have used his cigarette in this scene as a self-soothing mechanism.
you're going to want to light the cigarette for this one.
Great. Thank you for giving me that.
You had a relationship with a castmate on Riverdale.
Mm-hmm.
How did you navigate a breakup with someone that you work with?
Ooh, it was really hard. It was really hard for both of us.
So can we just take a moment and talk about the genius of the podcast host in this moment? Like, she literally said exactly what I was talking about, which is that Cole Sprouse tended to take a puff of the cigarette every time he was talking about something that was stressful. And what a great way to close out this portion of the video. And so that's why I really wanted to make this podcast episode and bring that to the forefront, is that we don't really know much about these celebrities at all. And this behavior of smoking that was seen by so many people as being deplorable and horrible could be something that just helped him to cope. And because he asked for permission and waited first, then you at least have to give him credit for that, even if you hate smoking like I do. One of the hallmarks of ADHD is problems with processing. So I want you to close your eyes for a minute and visualize two computers. On one hand, you have a computer from the 1990s. It's a lot bigger and slower, but it can still process information. And then I want you to imagine a MacBook computer from 2024. As you can see, both computers are going to be able to get the work done that you need to get done, but the 1990s computer is going to be a whole lot slower and it might have gaps in its processing. An ADHD brain during conversation could be a lot like that 1990s computer. This can cause a lot of us to use filler phrases such as or like or so. And I find that when I'm editing my podcast episodes, I end up cutting out 50 to 75% of the content because it has ands and ohs and so's and ums in them. And unfortunately, filler phrases are not very attractive in a lot of podcast episodes. Harry James Miller did a hilarious mashup of Cole Sprouse and his favorite term in the podcast in very many ways. And I thought it was really hilarious. I couldn't add the clip because of copyright, but you guys can definitely go and watch the video after you finish my video to see an opposite view of this topic. In very many ways was Cole's filler phrase. Whenever he felt like he needed to think about something a little longer, or he wanted to make sure that his response came out right, or he was processing what the other person said to come up with a clever response to that, he used the phrase in very many ways.
I believe that celebrity and success and, financial excess or surplus in a single generation is an elected trauma in very many ways. Mm-hmm. I have watched a lot of people come into success from much less.
Now, I don't know if you noticed this, but right after he says in very many ways, then he says, as if he's trying to process on the spot exactly what he wants to say. And that was what I was trying to say earlier, is that for people like me with ADHD, filler words and filler phrases are a great way for us to get our thoughts back together. This judgment of Cole Sprouse brought up an interesting topic, which is the topic of masking and what happens when people with ADHD and other neurodivergencies take off that mask. I remember a long time ago, I was obsessed with the History and Animal channel, and it's so funny because I never thought that I'd be able to use it in a video, but here we go. So in the animal kingdom, animals always travel together in packs. And why they do this is because when they're traveling in packs, it makes them a lot harder to be attacked by and targeted by predators that want to eat them. And so therefore, it is very dangerous to be an animal outside of a pack. Person that is different or neurodivergent sticks out of the pack. And so a lot of times, in order to survive in their workplaces and in life, people with neurodivergencies will mask themselves. And basically all a mask is when you turn off or turn down your things that make you different as much as possible so that you blend in. For example, somebody who might have ADHD will have a teleprompter that has all of the words, and they'll be looking at the teleprompter while they are filming so that they don't forget anything. Or they might have a producer and an earpiece where the producer is feeding them the information throughout the interview. Or they might just have a really good video editor who goes in there and clips out all of the words that take away or all of the filler words. Because of this, unfortunately, we are very used to seeing curated content. This makes it to where you almost have to be at that standard all the time. YouTubers now are stopping including bloopers at the end of their videos. I remember that used to be a huge thing. And because of this, when you see something like the Call Her Daddy podcast episode, which was raw and left in all of the ums and the repetitive phrases and the grandiose things, it can really throw you off guard and cause you to be a lot more judgmental because you're so used to seeing what you saw in that pack over there of perfectly curated content. And that's one thing I love about YouTube and why I watch YouTube almost exclusively now, because I love seeing the uncurated version of something. But it brings up an interesting point. In order to unmask, you have to be brave enough to face criticism. If you're neurodivergent and you want to unmask and you want to use all of your big words and your phrases and you want to come out and be authentic, you can't be surprised if you're going to face hate for it, because people just aren't used to seeing that. I am actually not a huge Cole Sprouse fan. Like, I mean, I really respect him and his art, but there are some things that he's done that I don't stand for and that I would have done differently. But what I can say is this: I appreciate how he was brave enough to come out and be his real self on a podcast, even if that meant that he was going to get crunched down for it. And one thing that I've also seen on the internet is that all publicity is good publicity. So I'm pretty sure that all of the millions of views that Cole Sprouse got from that podcast episode, and also that the owner of the Call Her Daddy podcast got, I'm sure both of them flourished and made a pretty good amount of money or whatever else, sponsorships and stuff like that from that podcast episode, even though they were getting hated on. And so if you are neurodivergent, don't be afraid to step out there and to take off your mask, because that's how people get to know you better. I mean, it's scary to be out here as a Black woman talking about this subject, knowing that people probably judge me and perceive me as a certain type of person because I say that I have ADHD, especially as a Christian. But I don't really care, because I know that there are those people out there like me who have never really felt like they belonged in most normal spaces. Of course, we have to bring it back around to Christianity. Feel free to skip this part if you would like, but I also recommend that you stick around, because this is really interesting. So in the Bible, there was a story about a woman who was a prostitute. And basically, she was about to get stoned because she was discovered to be doing things that prostitutes do. And a whole bunch of people gathered around her, and they all had stones in their hand ready to throw them at her. And suddenly Jesus came out of nowhere, and he spoke to all of them, and he asked them, he said, "Those of you who have no sin, go ahead and throw the first stone." One by one, each person sat down their stones and they walked away. And all that was left was Jesus standing there with the women. He told her to go, sin no more, and that her actions were forgiven. And I think as Christians, this is such a beautiful picture of how we can all be. The internet has become such a volatile place where we are so ready to pick up our stones and haul them at the first person that we see, especially people who don't agree with the views that we agree to. And I think that this whole situation for sure has made me stop and want to be more careful about what I say and do while on the internet. I distinctly remember a few months ago when Kate Middleton went and disappeared, and there was a whole bunch of people that were asking about her, and they were making up all types of horrible stories about where she was. And then she finally came out and said that she had been battling cancer and that she wanted to keep it private. And I think that was a wake-up call for a lot of people. And for non-Christians, it's a little bit different, and that, you know, they don't have that same standard, but the Bible calls us to be set apart. And so I just want to encourage you that if you are a Christian and that you are watching things, to think before you type up that furious comment, because a lot of the things that you're seeing are probably not the whole story. I know a lot of people who watched the Call Her Daddy podcast probably didn't even think that Cole Sprouse had ADHD. That was probably something that never crossed their mind. I just happened to look at it because I thought it was super interesting how many people were pummeling him for it. And I distinctly remember getting called some of the same names that they called him. And so, yeah, I hope this encouraged you guys. And now let's go on to our inspiration station for the day. I decided to create a guide of 5 ways to get more done and be more productive with ADHD. One thing I've learned about ADHD is that when you learn how to work with your brain, you can get things done. You can go and download the guide for free in the description box below. And definitely once you use it, come back and let me know how it's impacted you. You can also find my email on my website down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure that you catch one of these 2 videos or one of the videos that is in the cards, and I will see you again next week. Bye.